House of the Dragon Season 2 Episode 8 The Queen Who Ever Was. This is going to be my last ever review for this show. More on that towards the end of this video. Let's start with the good, the scenes that I genuinely enjoyed. Welcome back Dario Naharis. I thought the Triarchy storyline was very well done. A part of me was expecting to see Otto Hightower show up, but it worked with Thailand alone. Him getting called Tywin was funny, and that goes for pretty much all of the scenes we got in Tyrosh. Speaking about funny, I love Ulf the White. His scenes with Jace and then later with the dragon seats at the dinner table were hilarious, and I like the way they're setting up the two betrayers arc. While it likely won't need much for Ulf to turn cloak, with the way they're setting up Hugh, I imagine this could be quite nuanced. We've gotten a couple of mentions of Tumbleton in the season, and I think that's where Hugh's wife went to. It's likely going to be very tragic for him from here on out. I like Hugh Hammer a lot, and I think they've done a beautiful job with his character this season. Moving on, the MVP of the episode has got to be Alan of Hull. His scene with Corlys was just so powerful and a culmination of all of the scenes where Alan tried to keep it together this season. The sheer audacity of Corlys to now proclaim that he's helping Alan after all the years of neglect finally gets a big reaction out of him. He tells him how hard it was to grow up without a father, and I like that the dialogue highlights the contrast in the upbringing of the Hull brothers and Laenor and Lena. While Adam and Alan had to work hard for their survival, Laenor and Lena got to sit back and enjoy the riches of House Velaryon. It's very refreshing to have that kind of POV in the story, since most of our characters are highborn, and I would love to see more of that because it's a very important part in the story. Abu Bakr Salim was a wonderful addition to the amazing cast of the show, and I'm glad that he finally got his time to shine in the final episode. I recently watched an episode of his podcast and he had Steve Toussaint on. I highly recommend watching that, it's a brilliant conversation. Last but not least, I like the montage at the end with all of Ramin Djawadi's house themes blending in together and all participants of the conflict being shown as some sort of light cliffhanger. The Battle of the Gullet and House of the Dragon show version of the Fall of King's Landing are both about to happen. We'll see how it goes in 2 years. Sadly, that is all I can say in terms of things that I really liked about this one. There are scenes that would have been great, like Kristen's scene with Gwaine Hightower where he thinks about his place in this war and the stakes of it all, but then the ridiculousness of Gwaine openly threatening the hand of the king in front of the Hightower army just spoils it for me. That should never have happened, at least not without consequences. Nevertheless, this is Fabian Frankel's best performance in the show, and I love the way he delivers his monologue. Pretty much the same goes for Larys' scene with Aegon. It starts out really strong and then out of nowhere Aegon keeps talking about his burnt dick. If that was supposed to be funny, then I hope it resonated with the right people. I personally could have definitely done without that. Well, let's talk about Aemond, who seemed to be very fine with burning around 1,000 innocent people. The character goes from prancing about studying the histories and philosophies to being a terrorist who gets aroused by butchering small folk. Look, I would have no problem with this at all if they didn't care to give him so much more nuance in comparison to the character we know from Fire and Blood. The adaptation of Fire and Blood is rarely ever my problem in the show. It's the inconsistency of their own creative choices. They chose to highlight Aemond's humanity, and he seemed to have a decent amount of compassion in season 1. There was a lot of focus on the way in which he was brought up and the sort of challenges he had to face. Showing that there's a lot of good in him was a brilliant move, and I praise the people in charge countless times for this writing decision, because I love balanced characters and I thought that it'll help in balancing out both sides of this conflict. It seemed like they wanted to do more with this character, rather than just having him be a stereotypical villain. Don't get me wrong, I love his character in Fire and Blood because he's evil, because he commits those atrocities in the Riverlands, but up until this point I really believe that House of the Dragon is going to improve him and actually develop him into becoming that character, that maniac. I love me a good villain, but if you spend so much time trying to add nuance to him, only to throw it away in an instant, the whole thing becomes really shaky and just not believable. I'm really struggling to see how that character naturally evolved into becoming that person this season. I simply don't buy it. It was only a couple of episodes ago where he admitted that he regrets killing Luke. Throwing a 180 and barbecuing his brother in cold blood to gain power didn't really sit with me at this point of the story either, but this is now on a whole nother level. It absolutely limits the ways in which Alice Rivers could toy with him in the upcoming season, and therefore also absolutely limits the development of his character going forward. His character progression seems to be done now, and I think that's a damn shame. The scene of Daemon arguing with Alicent and Helaena is also just so weird because it's meant to highlight how supposedly wrong Daemon is when all he does is making a lot of damn sense. But that's more on Alicent and Helaena, and we'll talk about that later. This is far from being the worst thing about this episode, however. Let's talk about Rhaenyra and Alicent. Everything I just said about Daemon absolutely counts for Alicent too. I really don't know why they decided to jump the gun in season 2 already, especially at this point in the story. I always defended House of the Dragon's decision to change the dynamics of the relationship between Alicent and Rhaenyra, but now I absolutely prefer the typical evil stepmother stereotype Fire and Blood suggests, and that kinda says it all. I really believe that war will change them as human beings and complicate their relationship. But if anything, it only seemed to strengthen their bond in a way that really messes up the show's continuity. After their illogical meeting in episode 3, I thought that this whole season was structured around a big breakup of their relationship, and therefore tried to make my peace with it. I thought that it's nothing but a scene that is meant to show two incredible actors acting together, but I was absolutely wrong. I thought that from here on out we're going to see two people that share love for one another being forced to kill each other. It's cruel, but it makes for such a good story. One that we will never get to see now. What we got instead is mind-bogglingly stupid. In Fire and Blood, Alicent eventually gets sick of this war, and after it ends, even resents the color green. There was a whole war that got her to that point though. I would have been fine with Alicent not wanting to participate. Not now, not yet. Not after her little grandson Jaehaerys just died, and not while all of her children are still alive. It's just too soon for me and unnecessarily limits her character. Alicent is shoehorned into a scene that does nothing but shame her. But for what? What has she done in the show that warrants this kind of humiliation? If anything, she was one of the characters who had to suffer the most in the show. She was forced to marry a rotting man when she was nothing but a child. I understand the symbolism of finally setting her free. It's what I, as viewer, want for her character. It comes too soon, and doing it now just doesn't make sense for the character. Alicent opening the gates for Rhaenyra so she can kill her own son is incredibly insane to me. She not only gives up her sons Aegon and Aemon, but also her brother Gwaine, Criston Cole, and her youngest son Daemon by sharing battle plans with Rhaenyra. If you would have told me before season 1 aired that Alicent would open the gates for Rhaenyra during the fall of King's Landing, I would certainly not have believed you. This is just wild. I'm not a Team Green supporter in any way, but I feel for everyone who is. That is not the kind of nuance we wanted to see in the story. The writers of course sneaked in that line that history will paint Alicent as a villain, but no, it was you. Yes, Fire and Blood is unreliable and whatever, but you made it very clear who is good and who is evil, and by doing that you completely missed the point of this story. Sadly, I can't end this video yet. There's something that's even worse in my opinion. Not that. Yeah, that's pretty stupid too, but not as stupid as what they've done with Helaena in the show. Let's talk about Helaena the Broken. Helaena the Three-Eyed Crow. Helaena the second to last greenseeing. Helaena the what the fuck is happening here, I'm sorry. I like that there was an attempt to make Helaena more interesting than her book counterpart, but there should have been levels on how far this goes. How in the world is she able to enter someone else's vision from a random ass balcony with no one previously guiding her in becoming a greenseeing? The fact that she doesn't even need a weirwood tree to access her powers means that she's extremely powerful and that someone would have had to train her. Not even Bran can pull that off in A Song of Ice and Fire yet. He will eventually, but he's training, you know, he's in a goddamn tree in the lands of always winter. Anyway, when Bran reaches out to Theon in A Dance with Dragons, it's all through the weirwood tree. Her doing that from, again, a random ass balcony implies that she's more powerful than anyone we've ever seen before. Fine, let's accept that for a minute and ignore the goddamn books. How does this make any sense in the context of this story? Looking at House of the Dragon only, why in the world would Helaena guide the man that is directly responsible for the murder of her child? I'm glad that her prophetic claims finally actually matter, actually play a role in the story, but this is wild to me. And now my biggest issue of it all, why exactly is any of that even in House of the Dragon? This is a show about the Dance of the Dragons, a show about how House Targaryen laid the foundation of their downfall. Why do we have to focus on saving the world again? I get wanting to connect it to Game of Thrones from a corporate point of view, but why so much that it changes the entire character dynamics? We'll talk about this in just a minute, but it's now the very thing that drives Daemon's character, and it's just so stupid in my opinion that I can't even put it into words. I love A Song of Ice and Fire's magical aspects, and I wasn't satisfied with the way they were portrayed in Game of Thrones, but that's not House of the Dragon's problem. I can sympathize with the idea of having a greenseeing and A Song of Ice and Fire story, but this is just the wrong show in my opinion. By explaining how Helaena got access to the Weirwood Net, you'll only have to dive even deeper into the White Walker thing, likely with the Three-Eyed Crow, and that's just not what I'm here for. If you don't dive deeper into it and make an attempt to explain it, this is even more nonsensical. It's just such an odd choice in my opinion. If you wanted to go the magical route, then why not use the magical aspects of Old Town? We could have had glass candles, which could have helped in adding more logic to the Alicent and Rhaenyra scenes, and obviously the big one, we could set up the Grandmaster conspiracy in regards to the dying of the dragons. This is something we've been theorizing about for years. Marvin's ambiguous conversation with Sam where he hints at the involvement of maesters in the storming of the dragon pit. This is the fantasy aspect of Song of Ice and Fire that I would have loved to see here. Prophecies are undoubtedly a big part of our series, but it certainly isn't the biggest part. That would be the human heart in conflict with itself, and I was so incredibly pleased with the way the show handled Daemon this season, up until the very last few scenes. A lot of people said that the Harrenhal plot was boring and that it's too slow. As with many things this season, I always heavily defended it because of the way House of the Dragon focused on Daemon Targaryen's inner struggle. Him being haunted by the past was a perfect way of making him reconsider how he wants to approach the future. It wasn't necessarily about redemption, but about growth. And Daemon definitely needed that after season 1. I was delighted because I always wanted to have such a storyline with Jaime in the original show. Well, turns out it's all for nothing pretty much, because Daemon now changed his mind because of a prophetic vision. If they really wanted to have the prophecy play a part, why not have him refuse Alfred Broom's plotting first? If he denies him, maybe even threatens to kill him for treason, and later has that vision, I would be fine with it, but no. Daemon stays the same, and now all those visions from the past sadly just don't have the same impact anymore. Whenever I'm gonna rewatch season 2, I will always remember that it is all for nothing. Those are pretty much just cameos. That's really the biggest shame about this season. I give House of the Dragon season 2 episode 8 a 4 out of 10. I mentioned that this is going to be my last review of the show, and that's true. I don't plan on setting up my microphone just so I can bitch and complain about a show I genuinely want to love. I want the show to be fantastic, I want it to do well, and I want to enjoy it as much as I can. I also don't want to take away from your enjoyment of the show. I'd never run a channel that is all about hating on stuff. That's beyond stupid to me. You're never gonna see me release content with red arrows and circles just so I can get a few impressions. Believe me or not, it was never about clout or money for me. Not on Instagram, and certainly not on YouTube either. This franchise has been my escape place for years, and I'm very protective of that. In that regard, when it comes to myself, well, sadly I just couldn't enjoy the last few weeks at all. At first, I was constantly getting called out for supposedly being an HBO show because I got to see the episodes early, and then whenever I critique the show, I'm suddenly a hater. This constant drama is tiring as hell, and I have so many other things that I'd rather do with my life. I write my own stories now and just launched my own short film channel. But it's now been 8 weeks since I've written a single word because I was just completely burned out. I don't have the energy for my scripts, and that just tells me that the way I'm doing YouTube is wrong. Therefore, things will change. From now on, I'll cherry pick stuff that I think is worth talking about and do thematic videos. I was there when Game of Thrones turned bad in season 5, and I see a lot of similarities with House of the Dragon's second season. Therefore, I'll only discuss the show on live streams, occasionally talk to the cast, and apart from that, completely focus on the main book series. I'll now take a much needed long break and return for Dunkin' Egg preparation. Thank you for your support, thank you for watching, and see you later.